Good morning. We're busy with a series in conversation with uncertainty. This is the third contribution in that series, and together we reflect on the tendency to attach, to hold on tightly to what appears to be certainties. In this presentation, we'll be proposing holding on lightly as an alternative, as a counter-narrative. We can also perhaps think about this as in conversation with provisionality, that all knowledge might just be provisional. As you can see from these pictures, they all suggest a certain lightness, a certain provisionality, if you want, but more specifically, lightness, even the lightness of a butterfly or a feather as you blow it from the palm of your hand. There might even be a theological understanding of our lightness, the provisionality of knowledge, as we read in 1 Corinthians 13 verse 12. For now we see but a faint reflection of riddles and mysteries, as though reflected in a mirror. But one day, we will see face to face. My understanding is incomplete now, but one day I will understand everything, just as everything about me has been fully understood. A faint reflection of riddles and mysteries, as though in a mirror, understanding as incomplete. Perhaps this is daunting, perhaps this might come across as a huge challenge. But what does it take to embrace uncertainty of understanding as well? In this presentation, we might be discussing the story of the hermit crab, holding on lightly to our stories, the provisional nature of knowledge. We might think about liminality, detachment, and then, once again, get back to implications for self-care and care more generally speaking. Finishing off with a list for further reading. The hermit crab is a very special animal. It's got a soft abdomen. It makes it unique. Most crabs have a shell, a carapax across their abdomen, which protects them from potential predators and other dangers. However, the hermit crab has a soft abdomen. In order to protect itself, therefore, it has to devise different means of protection. And what it does, it looks for a suitable shell within which it can then move its soft abdomen and in this way be protected from harsh elements, predators, and the like. The life of a hermit crab is one of constant adaptation and exploration. Born in the ocean, a hermit crab begins its journey as a vulnerable creature with a soft abdomen, seeking shelter and protection in discarded snail shells scattered along the ocean. These days, it doesn't only look for snail shells, but it also makes use of whatever suitable container, suitably sized container it can find Therefore, as in this picture, you can see it is actually placing its soft abdomen in a thimble or the cap of a container, a plastic cap. As it grows, it outgrows its current shell. That's the dangerous thing about this. So, unlike a living carapax, it has now placed its abdomen in a non-growing, if you want, container. And as the little crab grows, invariably that container, that shell, artificial shell, that will become cramped for space, too small. And it will have to, as a consequence of this, look for a bigger container to protect itself. And this, of course, poses a huge threat, because what it will have to do is it will have to emerge from this container, exposing its soft abdomen, and then scamper quickly into the next container. The process of finding a new shell is marked by competition with other hermit crabs and the occasional skirmish over prized shells. Throughout its life, therefore, a hermit crab demonstrates remarkable resilience, flexibility, and resourcefulness, embodying the principle of holding lightly unto its story as it navigates the ever-changing currents of its underwater world. So this becomes a metaphor for us, where we find protection and safety in adopted ways of understanding, beliefs, models of understanding. And holding on lightly here might be an invitation and a challenge to realize that at some stage there might be the need to detach from where I find my safety now and move to the next space of safety. Perhaps in our knowledge models, this becomes a serious threat, as so often we place so much emphasis on understanding and find our safety in certainty, in apparent certainty. And this is an invitation to hold lightly and perhaps consider having to move to new areas of safety, new models of understanding, new beliefs even. Look at this one hermit crab finding a glass container within which to keep its abdomen safe. If we assume that human beings are meaning-seeking, that we as human beings are meaning-seeking creatures, we might start to wonder about meaning creation. How do we go about creating meaning? Philosophically, we can refer to this as our epistemologies. Our epistemologies, our means of making sense, of understanding, of creating meaning. Ron Williams says it takes courage to hold our narratives lightly. Why narratives? One way of perhaps thinking about making meaning is story. If our lives are easily depicted or narrated as stories, they start to make sense to us and we can find meaning. With usually the beginning, the development, and the completion of a story being three moments or elements in such a story. And within these stories, we start to create our meanings. Not only do we use stories to describe, but the stories also start to indicate what realities are available to us. In other words, they become the lenses through which we look at life. But because of this, because we find our meanings in these stories, we appropriate them, we start to colonize them, even finding safety. And because we have now adopted a story, we start to protect that story, nurture the story, being very reluctant to even consider the more which we encountered in the first contribution in this series. So, holding lightly onto our story also opens the door to exploring alternative narratives. We recognize that there are multiple ways of interpreting the events of our lives, a multiverse of story, therefore. If we might consider our lives as multi-storied, and we remain open to exploring different possibilities. That is, if we can hold lightly onto our stories. Please note, this is not an invitation to suddenly deconstruct and abandon. It is an invitation rather to hold lightly, not to attach. This process of narrative exploration can lead to greater empathy, understanding, and connection with others as we recognize the diverse range of human experiences. In other words, there is the suggestion that as we start to attach to our stories in the appropriation, in the colonization, we might experience a certain necessity to defend, and that might lead to separateness, which is an oppositional position, and therefore might lead to reduced empathy, understanding, and connection. So, instead of suddenly abandoning the discourses constituting our life narratives, it might serve us to hold lightly onto them. Once again, Brian Williams suggesting that it takes courage to hold our narratives lightly. Somebody also said, I've noticed the people I know who most resemble Jesus hold onto their expectations ever so lightly. And Corrie ten Boom advised, hold everything in your hands lightly, otherwise it hurts when God pries your fingers open. The provisional nature of knowledge. It is suggested that all knowledge is provisional, that our understanding of everything might have to be expanded over time, enriched over time. There's a story about Erickson, Milton Erickson, who walked through a forest, along a forest path, and he could see through a clearing that he was approaching a river. He could hear the water in the background, and as he looked through this clearing, he saw a fish, and this fish was dancing away. It was carrying out maneuvers he had never even considered possible for a fish. this fish was doing somersaults and pirouettes, and he was just dancing away. And Erickson was amazed. Now, had he turned around at that stage, gone back to his house, told the story of the fish, he would be telling a story of dancing fish, pirouetting fish, somersaulting fish. But he carried on walking. And as he emerged from the clearing, what did he see? There was a fisherman, an angler, who had caught this fish. And every time he pulled the fish from the water, the fish was struggling to get loose to loosen himself from the hook in his mouth. And that caused him to fight. And he was not dancing. This fish was not dancing at all. This was not a voluntary expression of joie de vivre, energy. This fish was just trying to get away from the hook in its mouth. In other words, do consider the provisional nature of what you know, what you understand. Is this a risk or is this a possibility? Now, also, if we think about this philosophically, if we think about meaning as socially constructed, what does that mean? It means that in our relationship with other people, together we reach understandings about the realities of life. So, if meaning is then socially constructed, and we accept that the social project is fluid and dynamic, as people are changing all the time. All knowing, therefore, must also then be dynamic and provisional. So one of the strengths of social constructionism is the emphasis on critical reflection and social change. So by recognizing the provisionality of knowledge, individuals and communities are encouraged to question dominant narratives and challenge existing norms and structures. This can lead to greater inclusivity, diversity, and social justice by amplifying marginalized voices and promoting alternative ways of knowing. As we invite more voices into the conversation, an improved inclusivity results. The next topic that we might want to discuss in this context is liminality. What is liminality all about? Liminality comes from the Latin word limen. Limen is a threshold. It means that we are on the threshold in between two spaces, perhaps two spaces of understanding. Perhaps we're moving into or we're moving out from, but liminality describes that in-between period where we are between stories. We can think of the Israelites as they were on their exodus from Egypt. In Egypt, there was an untenable condition. They couldn't remain there. That necessitated them to move out. But they didn't just move immediately from Egypt to Canaan. In between, there was a period of 40 years in the desert. Their liminality. Was this a wasted period? Yes, it provided hardship. It was associated with hardship, but it was associated with deep meaning making. as they, for instance, received the Ten Commandments and had such precious encounters with God. So, liminality within the realm of narrative therapy encompasses a state of transition, ambiguity, and flux. Flux, we are not comfortable with flux, but it describes that period in which we discover, in which we explore a certain period of provisional meaning. This is experienced by individuals as they navigate the thresholds of change and transformation. Derived from anthropological and psychological concepts, liminality refers to the liminal space between two distinct states of being or stages of life, then, characterized by a sense of betwixt and between. In narrative therapy, liminality is seen as a crucial phase in the client's journey, where old narratives dissolve and new possibilities emerge. It is a space where individuals grapple with the dissolution of familiar identities and structures. So often as we experience ourselves as being entrenched, caught up in the confines of a problem-saturated story. And then as this becomes untenable, as we protest this narrow narrative, this poor narrative, the thin story, that is where we are then invited into moving into liminality, to let go of that which we held onto, that which we were attached to. And then we move into a space where we start to experience disorientation, even uncertainty. And this suspension of fixed meanings and identities, in narrative therapists recognize liminality as a fertile ground for exploration and growth, where clients are invited to co-create alternative narratives that challenge dominant cultural scripts and redefine their sense of self. Within the liminal space, therapists accompany clients with empathy and curiosity, holding space for the complexities and ambiguities of the transformational process to unfold. And by embracing this liminality in the sense of holding onto lightly, narrative therapists honor the inherent creativity, resilience, and agency of their clients, facilitating deeper exploration, feeling, and the emergence of new, more empowering, more agentive narratives of identity and experience. Once again, the invitation here is to hold on lightly. Hold on lightly. Albert Nolan says, there can be no personal transformation without detachment. This comes from his book, Jesus Today, where he wonders about the spirituality, the radical spirituality of Jesus. Detachment, a chapter from that book. Now, detachment, if we properly understand it, means freedom, means inner freedom. This comes across as a paradox because how does this, let's get our heads around freedom. What might freedom mean? freedom perhaps might suggest a certain also holding on to our truths lightly. Although it's not a detachment is not a word Jesus used, detachment expresses very well an important element in his spirituality. This comes from the book by Nolan, of course. The ability to let go, the Christian tradition. This has been spoken of as a purity of heart, or as the process of becoming poor in spirit. We think of the Beatitudes, for instance. Detachment, properly understood, means freedom, inner freedom, and as I've said, that you, in the biblical sense, become poor in spirit. To any of us comfortable people, detachment sounds like losing, but it is actually about accessing a deeper, broader sense of the self, which is already whole, already content, already filled with abundant life. This is the part of us that has always loved God and has always said yes to God. The other stories might have tried to convince us otherwise, but were impoverishing of our self-narratives. It is the part of us that is love, and all we have to do is let go and fall into it. It's already there. Once we moved our identity to that level of deep inner contentment, compassion, we realize that we are drawing upon a life that is larger than our own, and from a deeper abundance. Once we learn to do that, why would we ever again settle for some scarcity model for life, according to Richard Rohr? Then, holy detachment, according to Richard Rohr, he says detachment is primarily an action of the heart. For it to bring spiritual freedom, it must transcend the ego. The purpose of detachment as a Christian practice is to make interior space for God. It is simply another way of opening ourselves to the inflow of grace, creating space for grace. But detachment doesn't end there. The ultimate goal of detachment is engagement. We detach so we can reorder our attachments, and then, aligned and cooperating with the flow of grace into the deeper self, we can allow love to pass through us, to touch and to heal others and the world. Detachment makes it possible for us to engage in freedom and passion with God's restorational and transformational work in the world. Here, perhaps we're reminded of Brugman's 3 stages of orientation, disorientation, and then reorientation as engagement. Abel Pina says in his creed, ek glo dat die wat soek, sal vind, en wat hulle vind, sal hulle verder laat soek, want alle waarheid en kennis van God en die lewe is altyd voorlopig. I believe that those who seek, they will find, but what they find will only encourage them to look further, because all truth and knowledge of God and the life will always be provisional. So what might be the implications for self-care and for care? As we've indicated, if we dare to let go, if we dare to let go of also the need to protect. We open ourselves, and in opening, there is fertile ground for care, for compassion, for inclusivity. And this is where the potential for care and self-care develops. So stories are not static entities, but are dynamic, and they are ever-evolving constructions and reflections of our lived experiences. By acknowledging the fluidity of our stories, we recognize that our identities and narratives are not fixed, but are continuously shaped by new insights, by new perspectives and life events. This awareness allows us to hold our stories lightly, cultivating a sense of curiosity and openness to change. Rather than clinging rigidly to a single narrative of our lives, we embrace the complexity and nuance of our experiences. This self-compassionate perspective encourages us to treat ourselves with kindness and understanding, even in the face of adversity and perceived failure. Narrative resilience refers to the ability to navigate life's challenges and setbacks by drawing on the resilience inherent in our stories. By holding our stories lightly, we cultivate narrative resilience, allowing us to bounce back from adversity, the problem-saturated, problem-locked stories, with greater ease and grace. This resilience arises from our willingness to embrace the uncertainty and unpredictability of life, trusting in our capacity to rewrite our narratives in ways that empower and inspire us, therefore improving our sense of agency. In embracing narrative flexibility, therefore, we cultivate a sense of self-compassion and self-acceptance. We can hold on lightly to truths. The ability to self-acceptance, self-compassion is improved. We recognize that our stories are not meant to define us, but are simply one aspect of our multifaceted, multi-storied identities. By holding our stories lightly, we release ourselves from the pressure to perform to rigid expectations or judgments, allowing for greater self-expression and authenticity. Here is a list that you might use for further reading. This is an invitation to hold on lightly, to explore, to remain curious, and enjoy the excitement of all of that. So by all means, have your beliefs, but hold them lightly. Keep in mind that all beliefs are stories, whether or not they're true.